Welcome to the good years, formative tech companies in the Twin Cities. I'm Matt DeCure. I'm a software engineer and Mini-Star board member. So my interest in this topic sort of stems from a number of times I've asked myself, where are the good places to work here in the Twin Cities? And initially, I feel like the first time was when I moved here and I was looking for a new job. And then subsequently, whenever I'm looking for a new job, I ask the same question, where are the good places to work? And of course, that's an ever-changing thing because companies change and, 1 year to the next, 2 years, whatever. And so I do want to sort of call out quickly, I have my talk description up here because I got a couple of things wrong with my sort of like incorrect assumptions as I was first setting out to give this talk. I was very much approaching it sort of open-ended. Like I am by no means a historian. I knew that I sort of wanted to explore this topic. I wanted somebody else to give this talk for the last couple of years, but I've been pretty busy the last two, and I had the time for it, but I don't know. I didn't really have the time to give this talk, but here we are, and I'm going to share my findings with all of you. So the two incorrect assumptions. The first one is that companies have this nice little arc where things are good, they're going well, they're successful, everything's great, something changes, and then things are bad. That, unfortunately, is not the most common story for a company. Generally speaking, it's just more complicated than that. The other mistake I made was that I was assuming that all these companies that I wanted to explore were good places to work. Turns out, I think most people, like, your experience at a company is uniquely your own. And so you could have two people working in the exact same role at the exact same company, and one of them might love it, one of them might hate it. So those are the two sort of biggies that I got wrong. And so as I was, I designed a survey and I had people fill out the form to sort of share their experiences working at formative companies. And what I started to hear from folks was, oh, I didn't fill it out because that place wasn't, like, I don't want to share that because it wasn't a good place for me, or it wasn't formative, or I don't think it was formative, that sort of thing. So, oh no, my animations are broken. You're gonna have to, okay, there we go, that's good. As I started talking to folks, I discovered that I was really only looking at like the tip of the iceberg, and that there were multiple like eras going way the heck back, way before I was born, way before most of us were born, in exploring sort of tech companies in the Twin Cities. And so that first era is like it goes back to the 50s-ish. There's a company called Control Data, which if you know of that, you might know of it because your parents worked there when you were a kid. Other companies like ERA, which was Engineering Research Associates, Cray, the big supercomputer company, MEC, and here's a fun fact for you, Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. Did I get that right? Okay, I got that right. They did not create Oregon Trail, but they were the distributors of it. They're the reason why a lot of us played Oregon Trail when we were kids on computers. They also did create number munchers and word munchers, and that is very much a Minnesota-made product. So this first era, we're not going to talk about today. The next era, this one, 1990s to like the early 2000s, this is sort of like the loss in the digital river, ImagineNet, Net Perceptions, or like Bitstream Underground, this era. We're also not going to talk about this one. But I will say, Pete Clark wanted me to make sure I mention this. Net Perceptions had this sort of like magnificent implosion around the dot-com boom and bust. And so if you want a really juicy story, go look them up. Okay, so I figure we're celebrating Minibar 20, we're celebrating Mini-Star's 20th anniversary. It's only fitting that we look at only the last 20 years. So that's the first thing, the constraint that we added here is the timing is just the last 20 years. The next thing is like, what do I mean when I say formative? Formative, I guess you can probably interpret this to mean many different things. It's kind of a fuzzy word. The first is that for me, because I'm the one giving this talk and I get to decide, I'm not following the money. What I do care about is sort of the impact on people and the community. Like that to me is the most important thing that I want to look at when I'm exploring these companies. Beyond that, I sort of created my own little set of criteria. For a company to be formative by by my judgment, they need to be a certain size, or they needed to be a certain size, which is to say they hired enough people that there was a cohort of really good folks. There was enough headcount for enough good people to be there at the same time. And then after the people part, the community impact, it needed to be something that wasn't sort of inherently part of their business, which is to say that the being part of the community and being supportive of it wasn't required of them. And so like I think of organizations like nonprofits like Ministar, like Beta, those are kind of out. And then other ones like I'm thinking like Hack the Gap or like a Prime Digital Academy, even like a Tech.mn, where those are sort of companies where like community is a part of what they do. They're also sort of not for consideration here. And then the last sort of bonus point here would be if there was an exit and they reinvested in community after that like companies get extra bonus points for that. So disclaimers, these are just my opinions. I'm sorry in advance if I offend you. And you all know about the law of 2 feet. At the end of the day, if you want to be somewhere else, you can get up and leave. That's totally cool. I won't be offended. Okay, the first category of companies I want to touch on is agencies. By another name, I'd call them dev shops. Really just like sort of client services companies. And that first company on the list here is Clockwork. When I think of Clockwork, I think like their superpower is marketing. Like because many of us know about Clockwork today, it's because of how loud and sort of active they've been in the community for a really long time. I got a quote here from my buddy Liz Tupper: "Music in the kitchen, working in the quads, the beginning of Coder Dojo, Twin Cities." I think that sort of like speaks to the vibe that it was sort of it still is. It's still in operation. It was a company started by a bunch of musicians, and their office is in this sort of old converted auto shop out in Northeast with bright colors on it. Like it very much sort of fits this sort of punk rock vibe. So by my measure, they were big enough. They had a cohort of really good people. There are a number of folks I know in the community, and I don't know. In my mind, I feel like I hold this like you worked at Clockwork as like a pedigree of sorts. And in terms of community impact, they did a lot. I mean, their headquarters was in Northeast, or it still is in Northeast. They started Coder Dojo, which was it was sort of just like an event series to teach kids how to code. And they like hosted in their space out in Northeast. And I volunteered there once, and it was just really fun. Like teaching kids how to code and build games with Scratch, just the best way to spend a Saturday. They also did this Minnesota Tech Diversity Pledge, this sort of picture in the top right corner, which was like a badge that companies could put on their websites to say, yes, I care about diversity. And so to sort of hammer the point home, a quote from a former Clockwork person said, "I still have friends from working there. I don't think I have what I'd call friends from any other place of employment." And that seemed like a sort of accurate representation of Clockwork, the company. All right, next up we have the nerdery. When I first moved here, this is in 2013, and I was looking around for like where are the cool tech places to work, there weren't a whole lot of names in town, and I feel like nerdery was one of them. And just as a quote, I mean, they're a dev shop, they're a client services company. They've gone through rounds of expansion and contraction. I got a quote from a former anonymous nerd who said, "If you ask anyone who's worked there, we're all bonded in trauma. The work sometimes sucked, but the people are the best." And based on the laughing here, maybe to some people that rings true if you work there. Okay, we got one confirmation. Thank you. So by my measures, they were big enough that they had a lot of good folks. In terms of community impact, like their office was down in Bloomington. I think they did eventually move to Edina, but Bloomington is sort of like that office location, I think, is a place where a lot of folks spend a lot of time at community events and meetups and that sort of thing. Also, this picture that you can see here, I don't know if anybody knows who Toby Crins is, but if you look really closely, that is a young Toby Crins in that with that white tie in the picture. That was the very first WordPress users group meetup, which was like I think in 2009, so it feels like a lifetime ago. But they hosted a ton of meetups, and I think the International Game Developers Group, they were the host for them for about 15 years, I think. And according to Martin, they bought them a not insignificant amount of pizza. So as far as how I would summarize their nerdery, they're bonded in trauma, and that the island of misfit toys is like 600 alumni deep. There was this sort of moment, I think, in the history where this 100 nerds in 100 days, where they had like a really aggressive trying to hire and grow quickly phase that didn't actually really come to fruition. It seemed like by some measure that was sort of the tipping point for when things categorically changed. I also know like they went through expansions and contractions. They had an office in Phoenix, in Kansas City, and also one in Chicago. And I know is it the Kansas City one that shut down? I don't actually know the full history, but that's sort of as much of the history as I can give you. Next up, we have Livefront, and I would think of Livefront as a sort of like a premium dev shop here in the Twin Cities. I also think of Mike Bollinger as like synonymous with Livefront and vice versa. He was somebody who's been heavily involved in community for a really long time, with like Tech.mn ages ago, and even like the image I have of him in my head is him like lording over Startup Weekend at Coco, just like perched on one of the railings like Batman. Like that's the image that I have permanently like etched in my brain of Mike Bollinger. And so that's what I think of when I think of Livefront. Just from a quote perspective, the team was small and elite, the clients and projects had reach, and everything was growing. This is sort of like maybe about 10 years ago, sort of the era of Livefront. But by many measures, I mean, they're large enough. They've had a great crew of people that they've slowly hired to join the team. And as far as community impact goes, they used to have this space in Uptown, and they had on the second floor, that's what the picture is, of the Smart Factory, which is what they called their second floor event space. And they hosted TC Hack Nights. So Paul, shout out to you. Thanks for the picture. Appreciate it. The other thing I would note is they had so many like presenters at Minibar this year. I don't know if anybody caught that earlier, but I think Chris Wadika, his session on Preppers and Comrades Unite, Shalana Dawson, and then there were a couple other folks too. I don't know if there are any live fronters in the room, but they're sort of prolific public speakers out in the community. So to hammer this one home, there's sort of just this air of next level competence to everything Livefront does. And also they've had very little attrition, which is interesting. There was a bunch of things that were new to me as I was doing this research, is that there was a majority private equity buyout in 2023, which I don't know if maybe either there wasn't a lot of fanfare around it or I just missed it in the news. But they also recently moved to a new space in Northeast, so they are no longer in Uptown. Their new office, from what I hear, is pretty swanky. It's over by Bauhaus. But I gave it sort of like a partial for exit and reinvestment just because there has been an exit, but I haven't really heard anything in terms of what's happened since then. And I will also note that Mike Bollinger doesn't live in Minnesota anymore. He lives in Santa Barbara, California. So there are a couple of small but mighty agencies that are sort of the next tier down. The first is Software for Good. When I think of Software for Good, I think of Casey Helbling, who is a longtime Mini-Star board member. They've been sort of very active in the community. I would very much call them small but mighty. They've had a cohort of really great people who have worked there over the years, and they've been heavily involved in community. I'm trying to think, like it was a lot of like civic hackathon things is what they've been involved in, whether it was Hack for Minnesota or Code Switch. I also know that like they built the Pride app, and so they had a spot in the parade, and so a handful of local tech companies all were marching in the Pride Parade with Software for Good because it was them who put that together. No exit, so there's nothing really worth noting there. The next agency, Recursive Awesome. This is sort of, when I think of Justin Grammons, I think of Recursive Awesome and vice versa. Justin Grammons is someone who has he's probably the most prolific meetup host in town. Like he's hosted so many meetups, he's hosted so many events, and maybe like around the late 2000s, it was a lot of sort of mobile tech meetups. So it was like the mobile Twin Cities, the iPhone developers group, the Android developers group. Later, he moved on to like IoT stuff with IoT Fuse. And more recently, he's been involved in AI meetups and events with applied AI and that sort of thing. And so the thing about Recursive Awesome is that they were a small crew, and then they got sort of acqui-hired into Code 42. And so I don't really know the full story with the exit there, but it seemed like it wasn't like a big monetary thing. It was more like they brought him in, and then Justin was like sort of a head of engineering at Code 42. The last company on the list here, BustOut. BustOut is when I think of BustOut, I think of Jeff Lynne and vice versa. Again, they're sort of like in this small but mighty camp, and they explicitly like to be sort of like just under the radar. And so, I mean, Jeff's been prolific and active in the community, but Bust Out, the company specifically, has been less so. But that's just because they're a small crew. And like, again, I should also mention they're still in operation today. Okay, next category, software companies. So these are companies that build software products. Code 42, surprise, surprise. We got a couple of folks here who worked at Code 42 in the past, so thank you for coming and thank you for sharing your stories with me. The vibe for Code 42, I mean, back in 2013 when I moved here, they were like the one like successful consumer tech startup in town. If you were looking around for tech startups, there weren't a ton. And so in terms of like what the experience was like, CrashPlan was successful and growing. The company had lots of optimism and was viewed as a darling of the Twin Cities tech community. That 100% tracks. The photo I have here, this is one I got actually from Baskin today, which is their old River Place space. Based on all accounts, like they hosted a good number of events and meetups, very much because Justin Grammons came in and they used the space to host events. They originally were in, I think, Northeast Minneapolis, and then more recently they moved to downtown. And they had this thing called a 1% pledge. So the interesting thing about Code 42 is that like they had this sort of like rapid growth and a lot of excitement in sort of the like 2013, 2014, 2015 era. And then there was this sort of like big like get off the bus moment, if anybody remembers that specifically, like that being like an important soundbite, that there was a bunch of leadership transition that happened and there was just sort of this whole kerfuffle. And so this is a company where it just seemed like there was like a very clear, this is when things were good, this is when things changed, and this is when things got bad. But there was an exit, so it is worth mentioning the exit. In 2022, CrashPlan got sold, and then in 2024, the whole company got sold to Mimecast. So this 1% pledge added up to 1% of the proceeds from that sale going back out into like the Minneapolis Foundation. So it's like the money from the exit turned into something good. Okay, next up we have Sport Engine. And when I think of Sport Engine, I think of like their really cool office out in Northeast. It's called Highlight Center. My information on this is actually pretty thin. So admittedly, you know, I had a couple of data points from a couple folks, but I think Sport Engine gets special praise just because of their reinvestment. As far as the quote goes, Carl said that Sport Engine was highly formative for the area and that it was a great place to work until the acquisition. This is probably like one of the most clean-cut sort of stories that I can tell. Their office was in Northeast. Highlight Center is sort of what it was called. There was this like short-lived like sports tech accelerator co-working space in their building called The Pitch. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but I remember seeing it once and then not again. And as far as like community involvement from their employees, they were heavily involved in youth sports stuff because they did youth sports management. And like the U.S. Pond Hockey Championships was a program or an organization that many folks there were heavily involved in. So what happened was, or I should say here, like in terms of the vibe, there was beer on tap, there were execs cooking breakfast, and when they hired, they had this sort of no jerks policy. The acquisition came in 2016, NBC Sports bought them, but it wasn't for like 3 years later before Justin Koffenberg and other folks sort of from the early crew all scattered that things like changed inside the company. And so the golden era here for them was around 2013 to 2019, even though the acquisition happened in 2016. So they get bonus points for the exit and the reinvestment because when that happened, Justin Koffenberg went off to Rally Ventures and has since been supporting up-and-coming startups and even spinning up new ones just from within Rally. The other founder, or there are multiple other founders, but Carson Kipfer, one of the other founders, he went on to start Monoline, and he also is like spinning up a co-working space in his hometown of Hayward, Wisconsin. I think it's called the Lumber Exchange, if anybody's heard anything about that. So they get bonus points because of the reinvestment post-exit. GovDelivery, this is a place that I personally worked, and I can say that it was an excellent place to work, even though I joined sort of right after it got acquired. In terms of the vibe, we have a quote here from our friend Tor. Thank you, Tor. Scott Burns put his heart and soul into making this a great company. And I would agree with that sentiment. When I went to work there, one of the things that I heard from a buddy is that the engineering team at GovDelivery is sort of the best kept secret in the Twin Cities. And that was totally true based on my experience. Based on my criteria, they're based in St. Paul. So the picture here is of the historic Ham building. I don't think that they're headquartered there anymore. I don't know what's in that building, but I know the Ham building's still there. And a lot of people probably don't even know that there were ever tech companies in St. Paul. I think GovDelivery was one of maybe two. Like When I Work was headquartered there for quite a while, or maybe not. I shouldn't say quite a while. It was headquartered there for a hot minute before When I Work moved to the North Loop, but GovDelivery was there for quite a while. So they were big enough. They had a lot of really good engineers on the team. The vibe was sort of engineering excellence and stellar leadership, and tech that improved people's lives. I think that there was definitely this sort of feeling of mission alignment with folks who worked inside the company. There was an acquisition in 2016 by Vista Equity Partners, and a lot of the sort of original crew that made it special had left by about 2020. This is, I guess, a case where it was good for quite a while, and then the acquisition happened, and then they acquired the parent company acquired another government tech company, and then merged us together as Granicus. And so I don't know, it essentially just started a slow decline where things started to change slowly, and they progressively got worse and worse and worse. And so the golden era sort of kind of stopped right there. I will say also, in terms of the exit and reinvestment, Scott Burns is sort of like a prolific investor around town. I like to think of him as sort of Mr. St. Paul. And post-acquisition, he continued to be very involved in the community, doing a ton of angel investing, and also the Osborne 370 building, if anybody's familiar with that, like he was instrumental in making that into the sort of tech and startup hub that it is today. So I think that GovDelivery gets bonus points for that one as well. Okay, there are a lot of other companies that didn't get top billing, and I'll sort of like run through each of these pretty quickly. JAMF was one. They do iOS device management. They were large enough that they had a cohort of really good people. They were very selective in who they hired. But by the time they really got going, or at least when they first started, there wasn't a whole lot of tech community happening here in town. And so by the time they were really going and the tech community started to sort of pop up, they were off like running conferences for their customers. So they just sort of like missed the community involvement part. But they were acquired again by Vista Equity Partners, and there was reinvestment that happened post-acquisition where Chip and Co went on to start Bootstrappers MN, which was a really cool program that they have geared towards sort of like founders at the very early stages. NativeX is another one where I got a lot of reports from folks. Like I had the survey and I had a lot of people fill it out. A lot of people said working at NativeX was awesome, and I worked there myself actually for a very short amount of time. It wasn't the right fit for me, but that's not to say it wasn't a formative experience for other people. The reason why NativeX has a knock here is that their headquarters was up in Sartell, Minnesota, so like very close to St. Cloud. And I'm focusing here specifically on like the Twin Cities tech community. And so there was an engineering office here in Minneapolis. It was, or not engineering specifically, but there was a smaller satellite office here. But the bulk of their whole team was up in Sartell. So there was an exit, and the reinvestment in the community I think has been significant. If you know who Rob and Ryan Weber are, they're the folks behind Great North. And I know that Rob gave a talk earlier today on the sort of lessons from his 20 years of angel investing. So they've done a lot for the community post-exit, but their headquarters in Sartell sort of loses them some points. SPS Commerce is another example of sort of a local, very successful, large company that's been around for a while and continues to be in existence. When I think of SPS, I think of Jamie Thingelstad, and sort of not the other way around, if that makes sense. Which is to say, I know that like SPS has been a long time Ministar sponsor, which is awesome, and Jamie's been very active in the community for a long time, which is awesome. But I don't know if any of that's because of SPS, the company. I think it's probably more Jamie. BuzzFeed, I know we got some BuzzFeed folks in the room. Hi, Ryan. BuzzFeed is an interesting story because it started out of like HyperIQ was the local, like the mobile development shop that was acquired by BuzzFeed, and so they became an engineering, like a satellite engineering office here in town. So they were satellite to a New York City's headquarters, basically. They have a a small engineering crew locally, and they hosted a good number of events, including like, I think Justin Graymans handed over Mobile Twin Cities to Phil Wilson, and Phil Wilson was the one hosting Mobile Twin Cities at the BuzzFeed office. If anybody remembers that office out in Northeast by Spy House, like at sort of Central and Broadway, like that's the event space that the engineering office was in, where they hosted events. Next up, we have HomeSpotter. This is sort of in the small but mighty category. When I think of HomeSpotter, I think of Aaron Cardell, and Aaron Cardell has sort of been present and active in the community for a very long time, both before and after his exit, which was to Lone Wolf Technologies. And so they were small, which is to say they didn't have a ton of community impact because of how small they were. But with the exit, they've been investing in the community. And then last on the list here is Particle. Does anybody remember the what is it called? The Spark Core? It was originally called Spark, and it got renamed to Particle. Spark Core, they had this like super big Kickstarter where I think it was like over 500K in backers on Kickstarter. And so it was sort of this like very exciting potential situation where, you know, another sort of emerging darling IoT company was coming up. And what happened was the whole team ended up moving to San Francisco. Or actually, I shouldn't say not the whole team, but the headquarters and the leaders of the company moved to San Francisco. And so part of me wonders sort of like what would have happened had they stuck around? Would things have been completely different? I don't know. But speaking of Kickstarters, if you've been following closely, there sort of are a couple, like there's a story and a through line that's been sort of missing thus far. And so when I think of Kickstarter, I also think of Smart Things. And the background and the story behind Smart Things starts with Refactr. And Refactr, if you were paying attention during session 0 today, it was started by Ben Edwards, Jesse O'Neill Owen, and Scott Vlamick. And I hope I'm pronouncing all of those names right. Mostly? Okay, thank you, Jesse. So Refactr got started as a tiny little dev shop. It was just the three of them back in, I think, 2006. This was the same time that Ben Edwards also started Mini Star and Mini Bar. And what happened next was Ben met Alex Hawkinson at a mini demo event, and Alex Hawkinson was starting SMB Live, and that pulled in the Refactr crew to help them build SMB Live. Jesse, do I have this right so far? Okay, I got it right so far. And so then SMB Live got acquired by Reach Local, which by all accounts was an awesome place to work, probably mostly because of Robert Toombs' work to make sure it was a good place to work. And then subsequently, Alex Hawkinson left Reach Local and started Smart Things, and then the Refactr crew left and joined him at Smart Things. So taking each of these on their own, they may or may not have been formative by my measures, but when you combine them all up together, because the through line was sort of these three folks, it definitely has been formative in our local community. And for fun, I wanted to show you guys some pictures of a space. This here is Refactr. This is one company. This is Refactr. This is a different company. This is Smart Things. This is a different company. This is Software for Good. And if you're looking at this, you're thinking, those are the same picture, right? Yeah, I looked it up. This building, so it's the third floor of the building it used to be called the Bulldog Northeast. Now it's called Stray Dog. I looked it up. That building is called the IOOF building. Robert, do you know what that stands for? International Order of Oddfellows. That was the silliest thing I learned in this whole process. But that office, it's so funny. I went through and I was trying to figure out like all the different companies that have headquartered there, because there's been a lot. I think it started with Refactr, and then it was Reach Local, and then it was Smart Things, and then there's this like fuzzy Software for Good came in there at some point, and it was whenever sort of Reach Local left or Smart Things left. And then after Software for Good, it was Agurian and then Cloudburst. So there's been like a long string of that space being like a tech hub where I think they hosted a ton of meetups. So if you've been to a meetup in that space, if the pictures behind the Spider-Man look familiar, that's why. So in all this research, I sort of didn't know exactly what I was gonna find. So I want to share sort of some of my surprise takeaways with you all. The first is that people are what make a company special. This should not be a surprise, because in my mind, it's like this has been right in front of me the whole time. But it does run counter to sort of my theory that companies were formative. It's like people are the thing that make a company formative. Next, community impact is driven by individuals, not explicitly companies. There were a number of companies I listed where it's like, I think of this person, it's like their community impact is synonymous with the company and not the other way around. Supporting community is good for business. You'll notice all these companies that I just highlighted, like they didn't have to do things to support the local community, but it didn't hurt them. I think agencies especially, it makes sense from like a marketing and exposure perspective that if you show up in community and you are building software solutions and people are gonna one day need software solutions, that they're reminded about you in a sort of passive, like not non-pitchy, non-sales way. And then the other side that's helpful, I think, is like just from a recruiting perspective and a hiring perspective too. Like a lot of companies that have been sponsoring Ministar for a really long time have been doing so just because they want to make sure that their name is top of mind when folks are thinking about new places to work. This was one that was just an interesting tidbit that I got from a couple different places, is that the companies that were sort of successful and stable for the longest were very selective about their hiring. JAMF, Sport Engine, and what am I thinking of? Another company, all three of them. Oh, LiveFront, yeah. Those three, like they were very explicit about sort of having a very rigorous hiring process and trying to not make bad hires, I guess. Another one here is just that valuable connections are made at events. The Ben Edwards meeting Alex Hawkinson at Mini Demo story is one part of that. The other one that I heard, and I'm totally going to butcher the details, are that like Justin Grammons met Graham Wood and Phil Wilson at an event that led to them taking over the Mobile Twin Cities meetup that led to BuzzFeed and that sort of thing. So I don't have all the details, but it just seems like the sort of thing where like a lot of really good stuff comes out of events, whether it's sort of unexpected connections or potential business ventures in the future. And then this was just another interesting tidbit, is that mobile apps were like a very common thread throughout all of this. Like whether it was meetups about mobile technology, or it was about like agencies or dev shops that were building mobile apps for companies that got acquired, just for whatever reason, mobile apps were sort of like formative during this era. And it just makes me kind of wonder, like, what's the next thing? And I really hope it's not AI. Blockchain, okay, there we go. Yeah, maybe that'll be the new thing. Thank you. So one of the questions, like as I was doing all this research and sort of synthesizing some of it, it made me wonder about sort of like why did these companies invest in community when they didn't have to? And I was fortunate enough to ask a couple of leaders at these companies. So Scott Burns' answer was just to pay it forward. That like when he was first getting things off the ground, getting started, people were very helpful and generous and kind to him, and he wanted to do the same thing for others. Mike Bollinger actually had some interesting tidbits. Like LifeRun has like a whole playbook around like their strategy for being engaged and active and sort of giving back to the community. But for him, it was really like that he's all about relationships, and that a company's success is really just based on their relationship with the community. And so they want to really just give back more so than take. Jesse had a couple of like, I think a very honest answer, which is that, you know, putting on events and being invested in community was just part of who they were, partly for hiring, partly because they were excited about technology, and also partly just for the beers. Thanks for that one, Jesse. And then I asked Ben Edwards had like a much longer sort of answer, but I think the through line is that he didn't realize at the time, but that community was going to be a big part of his career, sort of from there on out. And you know, it's something that's factored into like all the work that he's done, including with Smart Things having like a community, a user community of like over 140,000 people. So what I will do is I want to turn it back to you. Is why do you invest in community when you don't have to? You're all here today at Minibar, which is to say like that to me is sort of like the first level of community involvement. The next would be volunteering. The next would be presenting. Maybe after that, it's like you're creating your own events. You're making things happen in the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So just something to noodle on is sort of why do you invest in community when you don't have to? And just, I have a couple of recommendations if you want to learn more about some of the stuff that we didn't talk about. The first is there's a really good documentary from TPT called Solid State, which is about Minnesota's high-tech history. That one covers controlled data and ERA and sort of this like much earlier era that I didn't touch on. There's also a book about control data too called Generation of Wealth. There's a documentary about the Oregon Trail's history on PBS called Trailheads. And then lastly, this one was like a legit, just like a nostalgic trip down memory lane. Nick Roseth put together this awesome documentary. Here he is, he's in the room. Thank you, Nick, you're awesome. And it was about 2016, I think, that it came out. 10 years, yeah, 10 years ago. So documentary, I would say it was sort of like highlighting and like celebrating the Minnesota tech community. And I think they cover sort of some of the early era stuff, but they also showcase sort of like what was happening in our local community around that time 10 years ago. So that's all I got. Thank you so much. And I guess this is the time that I'll open up to questions. If anybody has any questions or if you have any burning comments to tell me that I'm wrong, this might be the time to tell me, or you can tell me afterwards at happy hour, or not at all. Anybody have any specific questions for me? Who's next? What do you mean, like which companies, what's the next formative company? Oh God, I wish I knew. I would leave my current job and I'd go work for them. It's like, that's what I'm hoping for. Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. I'll repeat it just for the recording. He noticed that there weren't really any companies sort of in the last 6-7 years, sort of since 2020. Why is that? I mean, I was thinking about that too. I was ruminating on it. I mean, COVID for sure. Oh, private equity. Yeah, Tor, that's a good point too. Yeah, it's like zero interest loans went away, and COVID sort of dropped everything to zero. I think that there's been a lot of there's been a lack of community stuff happening, which is to say there's been a lack of collisions. And so people working on really interesting stuff, like I think we're at a point right now in 2026 where like things are sort of back to maybe where they were before in terms of like levels of like interest and engagement and like coming to events. But I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like I'm kind of out of touch. Like as I was doing this research, I was discovering stuff that I just didn't realize. Like I didn't know the Livefront had a majority buyout, or that Mike Bollinger moved to California. It just feels like I'm just unaware of a lot of stuff. So I don't know. That's a good question. And the other thing that I was noticing, sorry to piggyback on your question, is that we had tech.mn, like for all of its faults, tech.mn, 10, 15 years ago was the place to go for news about our local tech community. And I don't know if we have like one central place that's not paywalled content where we can go to like see what's going on. Any other questions? Levi? How do we inspire the next people on the deck to be on the deck in 10 years? Good question. I don't know. I mean, I think we keep showing up and we keep building and we keep sharing what we're working on with folks. I think mini demos are a really good avenue for folks to share cool stuff that they're excited about. I do have this sort of trepidation that AI is sort of like eating everything, and in that like if you want to go out and pitch a startup, you're pitching an AI startup today. Like it would be really nice to see people pitching startups that weren't AI startups, but it unfortunately doesn't seem like there's much investment money in that at the moment. So I don't know. My honest answer is I don't know. Yep. You really only heard male names. Were there any other people out there? That is a great question. Off the cuff, the one that I think I neglected to mention was at Clockwork. Nancy Lyons and Megan Wilker were the two leaders of that company, and they were. I mean, I don't think either of them works there anymore, but they were so loud and so active in the community in terms of like doing speaking engagements and whatnot, that not to just like center, like point them out, but I mean, they were a reason I think why Clockwork stood out so much in the community, was that they were active and loud. But to your point, yeah, a lot of dudes founding companies, and that's something that I should look into more. I'll see if next time I see you, I'll see if I can have a better answer for you. Anything else? I think we're probably at time. Thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of your day.